person stole the swing I had that I was playing with, I had it first. You have to really break it down to children to be like, okay, was that treating someone with respect? No, how do we do this? You're explaining it to them further. And that might mean saying, okay, at recess time, no one can go to the swings without checking in with so-and-so first. It kind of depends on the issue. And the rules are flexible. The rules can change, my 5 rules never changed, but the little rules, little nitpicky things that the kids were having issues, those kinds of things were flexible and changed. Did you have your hand up, Tracy?
I think it's kind of like when you grew up in an abusive home, maybe thought that was how you dealt with stuff. But God's telling them there's another way to deal with each other rather than brutality.
Yeah, yes. Yes. That's a really good example, and I'm going to repeat it in case people didn't hear you. And also, I know we've got people that sometimes watch online, and we don't have a roaming mic. But you were saying, like, what they had been taught was abusive, was brutality. And what you are taught, what you grew up with, is what you do. And so God is trying to teach them, here is a better way. And yeah, if you don't know what it means to honor your father and mother, I can break that down for you so that you know what that is. Because if your life has been filled with trauma, abuse, you don't know how to naturally teach the next generation something different if you have never had that modeled to you. It's very hard to do. So we start in chapter 21, the very first section here that God is talking to people, and this covenant code is about the Hebrew slaves. And the quarterly lesson really wanted to break it down as this is not the same thing as what we think of as like modern slavery. I still feel like that's a little bit of splitting hairs, but it probably was a little bit more similar to indentured servitude than what we think of as like Old South slavery, that kind of stuff. But I didn't know that it was enough to really like harp on it too much because you're still dealing with people that owned other people. But here's God saying, all right, what do we do with slaves? What are you supposed to do with slaves? So if we start in chapter 21, and we're in Exodus, if you just came in, Exodus chapter 21, God says in verse 2, if you buy a Hebrew slave, he must remain your slave for 6 years, but in the 7th year you must set him free without cost to him. So this was not a permanent thing. This was not, if for some reason you have fallen into slavery, you are going to be stuck there always. This was, you do your time, and then you are free. And then God says, you know what? If that servant was single, you let them go single. If they were married, you let them go married. Which again, if you know some of the slavery practices of the Old South, even that was not respected. They ripped apart families all the time. And here's God saying, keep the families together. These slaves have some sort of dignity. They have rights. Just because they're slaves doesn't mean you strip away their rights. So you let them go on the 7th year. You know, if they're single, let them go single. If they're married, let them go with their wife. And if they have children, he says, if you give him a wife and they have children, only the man himself must be set free. His wife and children remain the property of his owner. I'm not really sure what is the reason, the rationale for that. Probably to keep the children with the wife, or maybe if the whole family was set free, they wouldn't have the means to maintain themselves. I would say also that as we read these things, it's good to know, especially these passages about slavery. Did people use the Bible to justify Old South slavery or to justify apartheid in South Africa? Do we know if that was true or false? So people definitely use the slavery. In the Old South, pastors literally used the Bible to justify the keeping of slaves. In South Africa, the people that pushed apartheid the strongest, it all came from the pastors. And if you go to South Africa and do a tour, they will tell you the people that started apartheid and promoted apartheid, this came from pastors. So that's something to remember as we read passages about slavery in the Bible, is to remember that we have used the Bible to treat people poorly. This is something that we have always done, and it's something that we have to make sure, how do we never do that again? Because we would all agree, sitting here today, just because it's giving us rules about slavery, is that a promotion of slavery? No. And that is not an encouragement of slavery, and that does not mean just because it's here in the Bible that slavery is an acceptable practice. So why does the Bible have these rules about slavery? And even in the Ten Commandments, it does say, it mentions slaves in like the don't covet other people. It talks about slaves and not having the slaves work on the Sabbath and stuff like that. Why do we have these mentionings about slavery if we know today slavery is an unacceptable practice and we want it to end forever? Why is it in the Bible? Yes. Yeah, because it was cultural. So God's not going to come down and say, well, it would be nice if he said, you guys need to get rid of slavery. This is not a good practice, and it leads to a lot of evil things. God knew that slavery was part of their life, and what he's actually doing here is uplifting the slaves. He's giving them some dignity, actually. Because if you are a slave, you have not a lot of rights. You have not a lot of control. You're supposed to do whatever your master is telling you to do. And here God is telling them, actually, you need to give the slaves certain kinds of rights, okay? Verse 5, suppose the slave loves his wife and children so much he won't leave without them. Then he must stand beside either the door or the doorpost at the place of worship while his owner punches a small hole through one of his ears with a sharp metal rod, and that makes him a slave for his life. Okay, this is not the best translation here, but other translations will describe it as, suppose the slave does not want to leave, he wants to stay, then he can. He can be a slave for life if that is his choice. But again, it boils down to what is the choice of the slave. And we might still think like, that's pretty bad. But at this time, that would have been a big deal. You are giving some dignity back to the slave by having them have a say in their future and in what they're doing. So this was empowering to a slave. And it goes on, it talks about young women that are sold into slavery. He's supposed to treat her with some respect. He can't just toss her out and not care about her. Again, women had even less rights. A female slave would have way less rights than a male slave. So to kick a female slave out to the curb would be very bad. A woman did not have a way to just sort of make her own living unless she was, a prostitute or something like that, which would not have been acceptable either. So these are how God is talking about slaves. And again, we need to always be aware that just because the Bible mentions what to do with slavery, it is not promoting slavery. And the fact that Christians used verses in the Bible that talked about slavery as an excuse to have slavery around is a great evil that the church committed in. And we have to always make sure that we stay away completely from that. We do not engage in that. There's no reason to just assume just because the Bible mentions it, it is promoting this. All right, the next section is the death penalties section, and this section is very shocking to us. Do we still have death penalties around today? Yeah, we do. So there's a part of us that kind of understands, yes, but it's still an ethical area that we argue about today. Some people are totally against the death penalty, no matter what. We shouldn't have a death penalty. Usually that's because it's hard to always prove. We don't want to put people to death if they didn't actually do this. And then some people are saying, no, if this person was a serial killer, a child molester, like these people should be put to death. And we would agree that those are egregious crimes that they should face the highest penalty. So when we read the Bible and it says, these are the things that you should be putting to death these people, we might disagree. We might say, well, we would not put someone to death for that reason. But this is God saying, these are serious crimes, okay? And again, if we think about what you said, Tracy, about these people are coming from brutality. They're coming from abuse. As a slave, you could be killed for pretty much any reason. So this is God saying, here's the reasons where you could kill someone. And it's not God saying, I want you to kill someone, as much as God saying, you need to calm down and let's take a step back. And here's the reasons that maybe you should kill someone, but that doesn't mean that just for anything you go and murder people. So as I'm reading this, I'm getting the sense of God being like, take a step back. Not God being like, yeah, go get them, kill them. So here we have in chapter 21, again, I'm a little upset about this translation, but here we have verse 13. Death is the punishment for attacking your mother or father, or your Bible probably says if you didn't honor your mother or father, something along those lines. Death is a punishment for kidnapping. If you sell the person you kidnapped or you're caught with that person, that penalty is death. So again, some of the ways that people went into slavery, think about Joseph. He was essentially sold into slavery because his brothers kidnapped him, sold him into slavery. God's saying that is unacceptable. You cannot do that. That is not okay. Death is punishment for cursing your father or mother. Again, it was very important to honor your parents and not treat them poorly. That's one that is surprising to us. And then 18 is where it gets kind of interesting. Suppose two of you are arguing and you hit the other with either a rock or your fist without causing fatal injury. And God says, okay, you need to pay for the loss of time, help them out with injury, help them heal. That's it. But if you beat someone to death, that is, you can get the death penalty. And then it talks about in verse 22, suppose a pregnant woman suffers a miscarriage as a result of injury. Then they have to pay a fine. And then we get to verse 23, which is a pretty famous verse. We all have heard this in some level. If she's seriously injured, the payment will be a life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burn for a burn, cut for a cut, and bruise for a bruise. So the purpose of this passage is to say the punishment should be fair. And we might still say today, in our own modern understanding, this is too much. There's that Martin Luther King Jr. quote, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. We understand that we can take things a little bit too far, right? But this was God saying, just because somebody goes and, breaks your arm does not mean that that person deserves death, okay? If you lose an arm, they should lose an arm. That is what is fair. He was in the interest of helping them understand, do not go too far in your punishments. Try to make it as fair as possible. And then there's a whole bunch of rules about what happens if your animals get killed or your animals kill other people. We get into chapter 22 where it's talking about property laws. What do we do if someone steals things? And, if you think about the Ten Commandments, what does it say about stealing? It says, thou shalt not steal, right? And that's it. It doesn't even really give any other stuff about it. So that's fine. Again, if you are one of the ancient Israelites and you say, the rule is you should not steal, that does not mean that people are going to keep the rules. Just because we have rules does not mean that people keep them. So when the people said, okay, the Ten Commandments say you cannot steal, well, what happens when my neighbor does come and steal my stuff? Because God didn't say. So here we have these covenant laws that are helping them understand, okay, so when someone does steal from you, these things, this is what you can do about this is what you can do about that. And not everything is the death penalty. All right. We can think about some examples in the New Testament when Jesus is sort of dealing with this. Because by the time we get to the New Testament, you have people like the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all of these very pompous people that are very into following the rules and doing certain things a certain way. And would you say that they have maybe taken things too far in their understanding of what the rules were? Did Jesus think that they had taken the rules too far? Yes. They were very legalistic, right? They were all about like, well, we can't do this and we can't do that. You shouldn't do this. You should only walk so many steps on the Sabbath. You shouldn't go and do these things on the Sabbath. Are you guys doing offering right now? Okay, Kathy's coming around with the offering basket. And remember in Matthew 5, when Jesus gets this question about divorce, and Jesus actually gives a really surprising response, which is like, well, you shouldn't even be allowed to divorce. And the people said, what? Moses let us get divorced, And what did Jesus say about Moses in that? What did he say about the people in that? Is this familiar? Is this ringing any bells to anyone? We can turn real quick to Matthew 5, because I feel like this is an important point to drive home. In Matthew chapter 5, but this isn't the example. Matthew chapter 5, verse 31, you have been taught that a man who divorces his wife must write out divorce papers for her, but I tell you not to divorce your wife unless she has committed some terrible sexual sin. If you divorce her, you will cause her to be unfaithful, just as any man marries her is guilty of taking another man's wife. That's an interesting example of where God says, actually, we should be even more strict on this rule. And later on, they have a discussion, and they say, well, Moses said that we can divorce these people. And God says, Moses gave you these rules because of the stubbornness of your heart. The stubbornness of your heart, okay? And I would argue that there are plenty of times where if Jesus could come down and tell you whether or not you should divorce someone, he probably would. He does not want you to be in an abusive relationship, right? If someone is beating you up, if someone's treating you unkindly, God's not saying, oh, I value marriage more than I value the people inside of the marriage. Like he would make exceptions for the rules. But what Jesus is saying there is some of these rules that I've given you are not ideal. Some of these rules I've given you is because you guys have stubborn hearts. And that's something that we also need to remember as we go through and try to figure out, how do I follow Jesus? How do I follow his example and follow all these rules? Remember that in the New Testament, Jesus also says, be perfect. Do you think Jesus actually expects us to follow that? He knows that we can't. He knows that he's the only one that can be perfect. We cannot be perfect. So Jesus, while he's giving us these rules, he's giving them to us to live in this sinful world. He's giving them to us for a specific time and cultural and place. And so some of these rules, I would argue that we really need to be careful not to just say, well, God said that suppose you borrow an animal from a neighbor and it gets injured or dies while the neighbor isn't around, then you must replace it. Because God said that in Exodus chapter 22, that needs to happen in today's time. Maybe it does. I don't know. But we still need to figure out, well, what was the principle behind the rule? Why did God give these rules to these people? And can we apply it to our world today? Because we probably should apply the principle of that rule today, but it doesn't always need to be the letter of the law, right? We lose a lot when it's the letter of the law. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church, it's not just us. There's plenty of other denominations that are like this, but we especially love the Ten Commandments. We love the rules. Part of this stems from our love of Sabbath. We want to always keep the Sabbath. But then our pitfall is we become a little too legalistic. We want to follow the rules. We want to check off those boxes so that we go to heaven or whatever. And that's not the point of it, right? Jesus would rather we follow his principles that he has behind the laws. Because again, some of these rules were given to us because we were stubborn. It's not about following the letter of the law. It's about following the principles behind it. All right. I don't want to take too much time reading about the laws for everyday life, but if we jump over to chapter 23, Exodus chapter 23, excuse me, we have a very interesting chapter about justice, and the Sabbath School Quarterly does get a bit into what justice means, and so I wanted to definitely cover this one. So chapter 23, Exodus chapter 23 starts off, the Lord said, don't spread harmful rumors or help a criminal by giving false evidence. Always tell the truth in court, even if everyone else is dishonest and stands in the way of justice. And don't favor the poor simply because they are poor. If you find an ox or a donkey that has wandered off, take it back to where it belongs, even if the owner is your enemy. If a donkey is overloaded and falls down, you must do what you can to help, even if it belongs to someone who doesn't like you. Make sure that the poor are given equal justice in court. Don't bring false charges against anyone or sentence an innocent person to death. I won't forgive you if you do. Again, this is a CEV version. Your version probably sounds different. Don't accept bribes. Judges are blinded and justice is twisted by bribes. Don't mistreat foreigners. You were foreigners in Egypt, and you know what it is like. And I don't know about you, but I feel like reading through these, some of these is like, whatever, it doesn't make sense. When I get to this justice chapter, that really resonates with me because how often do we need to be reminded of these things? Ah, man. And he's speaking to them like they're little children. Even if you don't like that person, you should still do the right thing. How many times have I said that to my own kids? Just because you don't like that person doesn't mean that you treat them poorly. And here God's talking to grown-ups. And he's talking to me too. How many times do I need to be reminded? Just because you don't like that person doesn't mean that you treat them poorly. You go and do the right thing. And how important is justice when it comes to following God? How critical and important is justice in our Christian walk? If you walk around and you are a hypocrite, part of that hypocrisy stems from your sense of justice is not a true sense of justice, right? Your sense of justice is, well, I want justice for me. I don't really care what's happening to you. And I think sometimes our biggest outreach and our biggest mission statements stem from us noticing other people that need that outreach of justice. Okay? When he says in verse 9, don't mistreat foreigners. You were foreigners in Egypt and you know what it is like. What a powerful statement. Just because someone is strange to you, just because someone is different than you don't mistreat them. And he's reminding them, you guys should be humble. You were in Egypt and you know what it was like to be those foreigners that were taken advantage of, that were treated as slaves. So you should definitely not treat people that way. I love that reminder. And then the bribery one. We all know that our law, our justice system, if we're talking about not the Christian church, but about the secular world, we have a justice system. What happens when you have a judge that starts taking bribes? The whole community suffers, right? Evil people get back on the streets, innocent people get put back into jail. It does not create a safe spot, okay? And that's, it has that trickle-down effect. It's going to be corrupt. It's going to corrupt your whole culture. It's going to corrupt your whole community fully. You cannot have people at the highest level taking bribes. And I don't know if you caught this too. Verse 6, don't bring false charges against anyone or sentence an innocent person to death. I won't forgive you if you do. Now, your version probably says a different wording of that. But the implication of that is God takes this really seriously. If you knowingly put an innocent person in jail, if you knowingly give a punishment to someone that did not deserve that punishment, that's serious. That is serious. My version says that God would not forgive this person. I can't think of a more serious punishment than that. And this is not something where we can look at ourselves today and say, oh, as a culture, we've really progressed. We don't deal with these issues anymore. We certainly do. We certainly do. We still have these same problems with justice in our world today. And if we as Christians can stand up for the people that are being downtrodden, what an outreach we would have. Okay? I feel like we do live in a time where these things don't happen. What an outreach we would have if Christianity, if Christians ourselves, if we were known as the people that stand up for justice, as the people that stand up for truth, right? People that are going to stand up for you because you've been treated badly just because you are a foreigner, just because you are, someone different. And then we have laws for the Sabbath. Oh, wait, I think there was another question I wanted to do before we move on from that. Okay, Sabbath School Quarterly wanted this question to be asked, and I thought it was an interesting one, so we're running out of time, but we can probably try to end on this question. So if you want to chime in, think about this and chime in. What is the difference between justice and vengeance? What is the difference between justice and vengeance? Because I think we would agree justice, good, vengeance, bad. But what is the difference? Aren't they essentially the same thing? So what makes one good and one bad? Ellen? Emotion? Okay.
With justice, you're following the law and what is recommended as the consequences. Vengeance is someone has been hurt, and now I am taking it on myself to give them the consequence that I feel is necessary to make me feel better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, and I'm going to try and repeat it in case you didn't hear and for people online. Justice is you are getting that consequence, right? You did something wrong, now you must suffer a consequence for it. Vengeance is that feeling that you get inside when someone wrongs you and you say, I am going to take matters into my own hand and I'm going to make this right, okay? And if you've ever read The Count of Monte Cristo, you know that story. That is a whole long novel about what vengeance does, because he gets mistreated. He gets wrongly thrown into jail. He gets a laundry list of things, kind of like Joseph, a laundry list of things. But instead of, like Joseph, offering mercy, when he escapes out of prison, he enacts vengeance on all the people that harmed him. And at the end of the book, he is still a broken man because he realizes that vengeance did not win him anything. It did not right the wrongs. And I think that's why we have that verse in the Bible, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. We are not the right people to enact vengeance. We are not the right people to understand it. Justice, yes. Vengeance, no. We have to leave that in God's hands. Yes, Ellen?
I think if we also put these two ideas together and think about the Sadducees and Pharisees in Jesus' time, right? So now you're talking about a law that they knew, right? Do not give the consequence to someone who doesn't deserve it. So they knew these laws,
Yeah.
but they took vengeance and justice to put it together in order to crucify Jesus.
Mm,
And he still, on the cross, said, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
that's right.
Right? So all these rules are great for us to live a better life and become closer to the idea of what we're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, looking back, these rules were also set up to show how much God loves us by still saying, no, I'm not going to forgive you, but look, now Jesus died, and he's asking that I do forgive you.
Yeah.
I will.
I like that.
It's an interesting way to tie back how those laws came into effect when Jesus was actually here on this world.
Yes, and that's why I love to just keep going back to the New Testament when we're reading these laws, because God is there to help us understand, a better understanding. Like, it's not just about the rules, and it's a lot about forgiveness and mercy too. And I think that that's a good springboard into the next question, the last question, which will be, do we still need these covenant rules? Do we still need the 10 Commandments? Are these rules going to be with us in heaven?
I don't know if they're still going to be with us in heaven,
Yeah.
but I think we still need them here, absolutely, on earth.
Okay. So yes, I see a lot of yeses.
I think so. In heaven, the principle is love.
Yeah.
The throne of God is love, but the principle behind them is love. It's pure love, true life, and that's love forever.
Yeah. I would argue, again, going back to my teacher example, I have rules up in the classroom that tell the kids what to do. When you are an adult working in a workplace, you're probably not going to have a list of rules that say respect and use your time wisely, and it's more understood. It might be in your company policy, but no one needs to have a giant poster posted above your workplace desk, right? Once you are an adult, hopefully these things are baked in and you understand how to be an adult. And with God, since these rules are based off of love, once you are in heaven, once we are made perfect, once we have love in there, we're just going to naturally follow these rules, okay? I'm not sure that they're going to need to be posted up where God's like, remember that you need to not covet. That's not going to come naturally to us anymore. We're going to have a new body. We're going to have a new mind, a new spirit. And so, Yes, these rules will be in heaven, but we won't have to constantly be redirected by God. Wait, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. It'll just be a natural thing. And I'm looking forward to that because you think you can understand the rules, you think you can understand the Ten Commandments, you think that they're crystal clear. Just because I'm an adult and I understand these things does not mean that the Ten Commandments are always easy for me to follow. And it does not mean that the covenant rules, these other rules that we have, are easy to understand and follow either. Jesus said, a new commandment I give you. What was that new commandment? To love one another. It wasn't really a new commandment. That was there in all of these rules. You're supposed to love each other. Like Jesus is saying, you know what, guys? If I could just simplify it, it's all about love. You need to love each other. You need to love one another. And that's how we reach people. We don't reach people with, hey, would you like to join a church that has a long list of rules? We reach other people by saying, hey, would you like to belong to a church where you feel loved and accepted and cared for and taken care of, where we can demonstrate who Jesus is to you? All right, let's close with prayer. Father in heaven, thank you so much for this Sabbath day and for the rules that you've given to us, God, even when we don't want to follow them, even when they're hard to understand, even when we want to rebel, God. We know that at the base of these rules, we have your love. And if we submit to your will and if we just learn to accept what you have for us, we would know that these are not rules to keep us in line and to keep us in place, but these are rules to keep us safe and loved because you care about us. Help us to carry you in our hearts today and help us to shine out your love to other people that they can see that we might have something that they're missing and they might be interested in that. We pray all of these things in your name. Amen.